Congratulations! You are in the right place at the right time. This is the Summon Courage, Change Everything podcast with Matthew Levy, an inspiring interview with a guest who has achieved big goals in life and work and who will divulge their secrets to success. Today, now, the man behind the microphone, Matt Levy.
Hello, Summon Courage, Change Everything community. I'm Matthew Levy, host of the Summon Courage, Change Everything podcast. If you like what you hear, please help spread the word in your networks and with a 5-star review or the equivalent wherever you're watching or listening to this podcast. I'm so pleased to have Dave Nast joining us for this episode. Dave is a workplace behavior expert and award-winning business coach with over 25 years of experience in human capital management, executive coaching, leadership development, corporate training, talent management, career coaching, executive search, talent acquisition, and human resources. Dave, thanks so much for joining me today.
Matt, thank you for having me. I love your show.
Dave, we're going to have a good time talking today about how to summon courage to achieve big goals in life and work. And in preparation for our podcast, I know that you've created several big changes throughout your life and career. I'd love to hear more about it. Can we jump right in and can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So back in the day, I had taken 2 years off between high school and college to be a rock star. My dad convinced me to go back to college while I continued to try to be a rock star, and I had the long hair and everything else to prove it. I was a full-time musician when I got out, and I remember I needed to have a better day job. There's an old joke, what do you call a guitar player without a girlfriend? Homeless. So I needed to get a better day job, and I remember interviewing for a pharmaceutical sales position, and the recruiter I met with said, "You're not really qualified for this, but I like your attitude. Do you want to come work for me as a headhunter, 100% commissions, no pay?" And I said, "Sure, sounds like a great idea." And I did it. I was living in my mom's basement at the time, so if I was going to take a risk, that was the time. And so I did it. Turns out I had a knack for it. I enjoyed it. I stayed in that industry for almost 20 years. Went out on my own in 2000, started my own retained search firm, had that for about 7 years. And then I had to reinvent myself again. I kind of burned out. It was 4 days a week worth of travel on a plane. It was a small boutique search firm. We had, maybe 5 guys. And I wasn't learning anything new. I was kind of burning out and burning my soul out as well. And the story I used to tell is I'm a car guy. That's one of my hobbies. And I had this really awesome car. And I took it back at the end of the 3-year lease, and the car had 4,000 miles on it. And I remember the salesman looking at me going, "Is there something wrong with the car?" And I said, "Yeah, no, there's something wrong with me." And that was time to make a change. So I actually sold my search firm off and looked around for different things. And I really wanted to help people, but I didn't know how. And through some networking and conversations, that's how I got into the career coaching industry in outplacement. And I did that for about 5 years. And I think you and I had linked up before that as recruiters, and you were J&J, or can't remember. But I reached out to you at that point because it was after about 5 years in the outplacement industry, where I helped a lot of C-level folks that were in transition. Those folks were calling me back, and they said, "Hey, you helped me when times were bad. Now times are good. Can you still help?" And I really wasn't equipped, so I was looking more for an executive coaching opportunity. And that's when I left, and I went to Vistage. And when I was working there, a lot of change happened. That was a chance. That was kind of going back to recruiting in a sense, but also it was a company that was based 3,000 miles away in California. I was out here remote. It was kind of a newly created position. No one really knew much about it. It was a big chance for all of us to take together, but it really worked out well. I had a fantastic manager. I met somebody when I was working at Vistage, and I had friends that were trying to fix me up with people that lived in central New Jersey and out on the main line, and I'm over in Cherry Hill. And I said, "Yeah, I'm not going to drive that far, but I'll date a coworker who lives in San Diego because that makes sense." Turns out it did make sense. We dated for about a year and a half, and then we got married in 2014. And we started our own coaching and training firm. And then we reinvented ourselves a couple of years ago. We added the Predictive Index, workforce analytics, to our practice, thinking we were just adding another business line.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hot, and who knew? And it took over, and we rebranded, and that's really all we do now. So a couple reinventions along the way. It's kind of pleasant to be in a situation where all that past experience actually now contributes and makes sense to what I do for a living. But I will tell you that along the way, when I made some of those changes, I didn't know it was going to make sense later.
Dave, let's start with that very first job when you decided to get into search work. You mentioned that it was 100% commission. I mean, you must have been concerned about, like, how are you going to pay your bills? How are you going to make your rent? So it seems like a risky maneuver. What was your mindset back then?
It was very risky. It's funny. I wasn't fulfilled in what I was doing for my other day job. I was kind of bored out of my mind. So I was willing to take a chance, and I actually played it out. If I fail miserably, what happens? And I thought, I can always get another job like the old one. I'm living at home. So if I really end up flat busted, I'm living with my mom. So I'm like, yeah, I could go rent free for a while. She was charging me rent. But I figured I was a bit of a safety net to get things going. And it was risky. And the other thing too is, sometimes you have like a really good run where commissions are rolling in. And then you hit a dry spell and they weren't, and then you'd start to worry again. So it taught me a lot as a young guy. I was in my early to mid 20s, just to save and budget for those rainy days. Mm-hmm. And that came up later in a really, really positive way. So go back to 9/11. My search firm's a year and a half old at that point. And searches that we had open just dried up. Companies, the economy took a hit. Company was like, yeah, we're not hiring. So a lot of projects dried up. I had invoices on the street that went unpaid, and I had to call CFOs of these companies, and they said, we've decided not to pay 3 vendors, and you're one of them. So, and stuff like that happened. So I had to find a way. And at that point, I had a mortgage and a bunch of other responsibilities. So I remember just having to go back to old skill sets to, get by. I used to detail cars. So when I was a young teenager, that was a way I used to make money so I could buy a car. Started when I was 14, and I detailed cars as a business owner when I was 31 years old to make extra money. I used to play basketball behind my gym, and their parking lot backed up to the parking lot of a brewery that was nearby. Mm-hmm. And on Tuesday and Thursday nights, they would oftentimes unload trucks. One time the guy came over and he said, hey, you guys want to make some extra money? And for $100 cash, in the case of beer of my choice, I could help them unload the truck. So we started playing basketball every Tuesday and Thursday that summer just to make extra money, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it could be anywhere between, could be $800 a month, which, at that point was my mortgage. And it was cash, which was cool. And when football season rolled around, I was the most popular guy in the world because I would show up with a case of beer because I had, 16 cases of beer in my basement that I would never drink. So, but yeah, a little bit of hustle never hurt.
Yeah, that hustle is exactly the word that was on the tip of my tongue as well. Where did that sense of hustling to make ends meet, where did it come from?
I can honestly say it was my dad. How do I say this? He was in a position to provide me with everything. He made me work for it at a young age. There's a story I've told a few times. I was 14 years old reading the Sunday paper, and I saw ads for used cars, and I wanted a car when I was 16. And of course, I wanted like a Corvette or something. And my dad said, yeah, keep dreaming. But I made a deal with him. I said, Dad, if I can afford the car, will you help me? Because the insurance was more than the car. And he said, you know what, if you can afford the car and I can approve it, he said, yeah, I'll help you with that. So it gave me a goal. And that's when I started the detailing business and waxing cars and saving money and doing things. And I had to invent marketing schemes. And I went to my dad's office and said, hey, I'll do your car while you're here today. And walked around the neighbors in every neighborhood nearby and knocked on doors and said, you want your car waxed? You want it washed? And I charged different prices. I got in the yellow pages and called all the other detailers to see what they charge, and I charged less. things like that. So it gave me some skills that were helpful later in life, especially as a headhunter, not being afraid to call anyone at any time, anywhere. That came into play later too. So he motivated me. If I wanted something, he would ask me what I wanted. He would help me determine what I needed to get there. And then he would say, get to work. And I would. And it taught me the value of a dollar, which was important. A lot of my friends, though, thought that my dad was, kind of a hard ass. Mm-hmm. And I did too at the time, by the way. I look back now and I'm kind of like, oh, I get it. I so get it. I would do the same thing. And I talk to friends my age who have kids, and they're at that age now where it's, they could get a job if they want to. And I tell them my stories, and the kids are like, shut up, Uncle Dave. So, yeah.
Now, that's interesting, Dave. I'm thinking about a podcast I listened to, and I wrote a blog post, so I'll link it in the show notes. But it was the fella that started 5 Hour Energy. And of course, he's worth a lot of money these days. And at the end of that podcast where he was interviewed, the question came up about whether he would basically set his son or children for life. And he said absolutely not, that he felt that the value of life itself is to show what you can do. And if you take that incentive away from a child, you're not doing them any service as a parent.
It's funny, even now as a business owner, the question has come up a few times, like, oh, what are we going to do if this doesn't work? And it doesn't faze me, because I'm like, I know I can get a job somewhere and work my butt off. Like, I have all the confidence in the world in my abilities to make money somehow. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if I would have had that had he not instilled that in me at such a young age. And I always had a job. I had real jobs. I worked at grocery stores, and I worked on a maintenance crew. My nickname was Stump Boy because they dropped me off at this one site to remove like 6 or 7 tree stumps, but I was too young to use power tools. So I had to do it with an axe and a pick. And I got it all done by lunch. And they were like, oh, look, it's Stump Boy. So that was my nickname for a while. I did the detailing cars thing, so I wasn't afraid to get my hands dirty. The best job I think I had as a teenager, though, was I worked at a record store, and I loved music. I didn't make a lot of money at that job because the money came home in the form of CD and cassettes. So he was like, oh, yeah. He'd sell it to me at cost, but instead of taking my paycheck, I'd be like, yeah, give me the latest Prince album.
That's interesting. There was a few things you said, Dave, that I'd like to explore. One was, it was something around the concept that you always considered, like, I don't know, like what the worst case scenario is, and the fact that even in that worst case scenario, you would still be okay.
Yeah, when it comes to, when I look at a financial statement, or I look at a P&L or something like that, if you know kind of what your burn run ratio is, and you can control expenses, it gives you so many more options. And if you're not overspending and not overdoing things, it gives you the ability to take more risks, take more chances. And then when stuff comes along, like, I always look at what the worst case scenario is, and then I do everything I can to prevent it from happening. And a lot of times it does come down to sweat, sometimes a little bit of innovation as well. And, file that under regret minimization, but I would never want to start something and ever be able to say, oh, I didn't do everything I could to make that work. I want the ability to sleep at night, even if I fail miserably. If I fail knowing I tried everything I could, mm-hmm. I'll still sleep at night.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm thinking about, one entrepreneur said, if you just give me a case of oatmeal and a sleeping bag, I'm good for a month.
Not that you'd want to sleep next to him if that's the case, but yeah.
Right. The concept being that, as you say, we can get by. There always is a way.
When I got married in 2014, my wife had some interesting comments about the condo that I live in. I'd been here for 20 years. I'd refinanced when I should, so my mortgage payment is smaller than a lot of people's car payments. My stove is 20 years old, but I had 3 really cool vehicles in the garage. So one of which I gave to her, one of which I sold, and I kept the other one. So.
You have your priorities in order.
Absolutely.
Right. So let's move forward. I'd love to talk to my guests about these concepts of what I call the Dream Action Plan, which is a framework for people to achieve anything, any big goal that they want for themselves. And the first piece of that action plan is around devotion and the idea that, if you can think of a way to help humanity, to leave a legacy, you can be more committed to whatever it is that you're doing. Has this concept about legacy, life purpose, and so on, has this been anything that you've thought about or wrestled with?
Yeah, it's actually in our business plan. Our goal, whether we're coaching someone, which is what we started doing, or what we're doing now with the Predictive Index, it's to improve the lives of people and businesses. Because we've all been employees in companies that were run well, and we've all been employees in companies that weren't run well. And as a business owner, and having run a couple of businesses now myself, it's very important that we make an impact on the individuals. So that's kind of our central mission. And the reason why the Predictive Index fit into our practice so well, we started coaching individuals to help individuals, and then we saw a way to have an impact on an entire organization. And it's going to sound really cheesy, but I think of the pebble of the pond. We help a company around here, and then we help several companies around here, and that ripples out. So now we're helping the region, and then we're helping the state, and then we're helping the country, and all those types of things. So that's our legacy. That's what we want to do. And like I said, I think it might be at the top of the page, or it's very close to the top of the page 1 of our business plan.
So say more then about how does PI in particular help in that way?
So it's workforce analytics, and I like to say that analytics create awareness. So when you have awareness of what's driving your people, you can ensure that they are in the best possible position they could be in, that you're communicating with them properly. A lot of times you have great people in great positions, but it's the communication that's lacking. It helps with that. Sometimes when you're planning ahead and when you're bringing new people into your organization. So if you look at it holistically, we talk about succession planning, future leaders, and all that other fun stuff. So if you don't have good people coming in, it starts at the beginning. So employee retention as well as recruiting, they are actually dependent upon one another. It's easier to recruit great people when great people stay, and it gets really, really hard when turnover is high and people are leaving to get new people in.
Dave, so let's talk about resolve. That's the next step in this action plan. And resolve is a lot about goal setting, but it's also about what I would call, unwavering determination. And you already touched on a little bit of that. For example, in the world of headhunting, having to cold call, and of course, even in your current business model, there are needs to make calls, to solicit, to engage in interest. Talk to us a little bit about your philosophy around that.
So luckily right now in our current business, it's mostly referral based. I was a cold calling machine, and I'm a stubborn dude. So yeah, I used to average 130 phone calls every day between 9 a.m. and noon. I had a 65% callback ratio, which wasn't bad for back in the day. And I was stubborn, and I would go to Barnes & Noble. This is the day before the internet. I would go to Barnes & Noble on Sunday and look at all the job ads that were placed and jot them down from all the newspapers all around the country. And then on Monday, I would just cold call everybody to go get the jobs.
But Dave, back in the day when you were making those calls, I mean, people had to be hanging up in your ear all the time.
So yeah, back then, executive search wasn't an accepted way of doing things. So you were calling people at work, and they were like, "Don't ever call me again." Click. It happened all the time. We got hung up on all the time. And it's funny. I shouldn't tell you this part of the story, but we would sometimes keep track of the folks that hung up on us. And then this was the days before caller ID. So, occasionally when we were bored, we might, crank call them on Friday afternoons. So, but that's another story for another podcast.
Excellent. Great. So let's talk next about energy. Everything that you've described, the hustle, the detailing, the cases of beer, the headhunting, even what you're doing these days, it all seems to add up to just having a ton of energy. Is that the case?
I have been accused of that my whole life. My mom, I was the youngest of three, and my mom just said I just had energy for days. I think I still do. There was a time I recently ran the Philadelphia Marathon back in November for the first time in like 8 years. I had a back injury, and there was a week. There was this one crazy week. It was the hardest week of the training. It was the week when you have to do like 5 miles on a Monday and 10 miles on a Wednesday and 20 on a Friday. And I had a speaking engagement Thursday night before the 20-mile run. I was out in Lancaster, like 2 hours from here, all day Wednesday. I was on a panel discussion that Tuesday, and I was in New York the day before. So I had to get up like 4 in the morning and do all this stuff. And then I went and ran 20 miles on a Friday afternoon. So I've been accused of always having tons of energy, and I don't know where it comes from. I don't eat anything. I eat well, but I don't eat anything crappy. I'm off coffee, but I still have tons of energy.
Well, so then that begets the question, what do you do to recharge? Because like cell phones run out of batteries, human beings run out of juice as well.
Yeah, it's, there's a couple things I do. I started meditating a couple years ago, and that, I'd say, the end of last year, I mean, it's a little over a year now. That's really helped me focus. It's really helped me recharge my batteries quite a bit. And we start every day, and we do that every morning together, me and my wife and my business partner, Christine. Back in the day, I used to ride motorcycles on long rides just to think and clear my head. Now I'm doing more of the running. So I'll be out there and I'm running. The long runs give you a lot of time to think, to do stuff. So that's been helpful. And then there's some people too. There are people that we interact with, that you always come away from a meeting with them and you're charged up, where they make you feel good and that sort of thing. So there's some people in my life that I like to surround myself with. You're one of them, and I'm not just saying that, but I always feel positive after our interactions. There's a guy that we know named Dave Bookbinder.
Yeah.
We spend time with him. We're friends with him and his wife, and we'll do double dates, but we always, those dinners last 4 hours, and, and I always come away wanting more. And so there are certain people that kind of feed you, and there are certain things and activities that feed you. And working on music, I still will work on music here and there. That kind of feeds my energy quite a bit. And every once in a while, just kind of reading and some downtime will charge my batteries.
That's great, Dave. But also there's a concept of divesting from people that drain you of energy, or things that drain you of energy. Do you have to keep an eye on that as well?
Oh my gosh, so much so. Like I can do all the things in the world to charge my battery, but if you've got some other people out there, you call them energy vampires that are just going to suck the life out of you, it's just not worth it. And yeah, it's hard because sometimes those people are positioned close to you in life, and it's a conscious decision. And if you can't really cut them off, maybe you just minimize exposure and time, and you'll know who they are, because you'll come away and you'll be complaining. Energy is contagious. So you'll come away and you'll be down, you'll be negative, you'll be complaining, you'll be upset. And then you're still talking about them a day later. And you believe they said that, and all this other stuff. And that's not good. That doesn't feed my soul. That actually takes away from it. So it's hard, but yeah, you minimize the interaction.
How about the importance of having a positive attitude?
That's everything. I've been accused of being very optimistic, in a good way. People have told me about other people, and I will always just take that with a grain of salt and try to experience people myself. I give people the benefit of the doubt. Being optimistic and being positive, it's never hurt me, because sometimes you go into a situation and, it's not what you thought it was and you get burned. And it's like, okay, you went in with a positive attitude, willing to take a chance or give people the benefit of the doubt. And then it didn't go well. Okay, on to the next. So what? If I worry about things, and that's the thing, it takes the same amount of energy to worry about something as it does to resolve something or plan ahead or do something positive. So having a positive outlook, some people say, oh, that's cheesy. It's more than just the power of positive thinking. You actually, what's the phrase? What you think about comes about. So if you're thinking positively and you're focusing on the good things that could happen instead of the bad, like with a business plan, yeah, you plan for the worst and then you work to avoid it. That's the important part, is you work to avoid it. So you focus on the good things, because, okay, what if everything works out? What does that look like? What does that feel like? So what's it going to do if I feel like that now, like it's already happened? It never hurts you to walk around feeling positive and feeling good. You get more energy from it and you take things in a better way.
Yeah, that certainly resonates for me. Several things. One of those quotes is change your thoughts, change your world. That's partly what I think you're speaking of. You also touched, I think, on this premise from Viktor Frankl, which is around between stimulus and response is a space. And the key to life is understanding there's a space and choosing how you want to react to that stimulus. So whatever adversity is, it can be really reframed that this is something to learn from and something to grow from.
I agree. And I love that, what is it? Learning, failure is learning. And then there's some people who put a spin on it. It's like, a mistake made twice is a choice. So, but you do learn from mistakes. You'll never forget how that felt. So I do think there's some good learning there. And even also, you can sometimes plan ahead, do all the right work, do all the right things, say all the right things, and it still doesn't go your way. Did it hurt you to do all that work in preparation? Absolutely not. You learn something along the way. Does it take the sting out of losing or failing? Not necessarily, but it does make it easier to move on, I think. So it's never, that's a big thing that I'm working on this past year, is preparation, doing a little bit more work and preparing and stuff like that. Because I've gotten lazy in the fact that I know I can improvise well. And that's burned me a few times this year. So I'm spending more time doing preparation. And there are times where I just over prepared for everything and I didn't need 75% of what I practiced and all this other, still didn't hurt. I still learned something, and what it did though is I sent me in with real confidence. And I think people can read that sometimes.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, you reminded me that a lot of us say yes to so many different projects that it becomes difficult to focus on the most important things. Do you struggle with this concept of trying to, say no to things and keep your focus?
I do. It's the one thing I've had to learn, especially in the last 2 years, is the authentic no. And it's hard for me. I'm a bit of a pleaser. I want to help. I want to do things. So it's hard for me to say no to something where someone's asking for help. Other times it's an inclusion thing. And, I want to do everything. And it's just not enough time to do it, even with the amount of energy that I have. So it is very hard to say no and stay focused, and not spread yourself too thin. But I can tell you one thing that's helped. I have noticed that when I don't multitask and when I do focus on one thing at a time, I get better results. And that's like that positive feedback that I need to remind myself. And because I was addicted to multitasking for so long, and none of us multitask well. I don't really care what you say, because if you multitask well, then I know if you laser focus on something, you're going to be amazing. So we all are better when we're focused. And I know mindfulness is a big thing right now and all that stuff, but it really does make a difference to be in the moment and listening. And that's part of the listening that I've been learning too, is being in the moment, as opposed to oh, I can answer that, what you just said, and then kind of, now I'm not listening anymore.
I read something interesting recently, Dave, about this concept of focus and busyness, and it said that busyness is a form of laziness because it's a indication of indiscriminate action.
I like that.
Isn't that interesting?
I like that a lot. I actually tried to change my language, the way I talk about it. So people would say, "How are you?" And, "Oh my gosh, we're so busy." And busy is a 4-letter word. And I tried to reframe it for myself. And I used to make myself feel better about what I was saying. I'd say, "Oh, I'm really, really active now," because it has more positive connotations. So I did it just for myself. And then on a just checking things out, I went to Word, MS Word, and I typed in it. If you can highlight the word and right mouse click and look at the thesaurus on a word, the thesaurus on busy was all these horrible things, stress, all these other things that it said in there. And then the thesaurus and synonyms for active were very, very positive, and vibrant, and this and all this other great stuff. So I was like, all right, I got to start changing how I talk to myself a little bit. But you're right, busyness. I love that quote that you gave.
Yeah. One other quick idea for our listeners and our viewers is the concept of putting a note by your desk that says, "Is this a distraction or is it advancing my business?"
I like that a lot. I like that a lot. I wish I had had that when I was a headhunter back in the day. That would be helpful.
Yeah, interesting, huh? Right.
Yeah, good stuff.
So the M in the dream framework is mastery. The idea of continuous learning could be from taking classes and courses, books, mentors, the list goes on and on. What are some of the things that you try to do, Dave, to remain sharp and to continue to learn?
So yeah, I'm a huge proponent of reading, podcasts. I will listen to stuff in the car other than music, even though I love music, because that's a lot of downtime for things. The other thing too, workshops, continue training, other stuff. Like Christine and I read this great book by Chris Voss called Never Split the Difference. And he's a former hostage negotiator for the FBI, and he wrote a book about negotiating. He had a workshop in DC. It was a full day, not around the corner for us, but I was like, you know what? We like the book. We've been putting some of the principles in the book into action. Let's go. Just to constantly be learning and doing things. And the other thing we started doing too is not just talking to our peers, which is always helpful. Hey, what are you doing differently? I've been talking to competitors. What are you doing? And kind of an exchange of ideas. And that's just helpful. And people at first are like, "I'm not going to tell you any of my trade secrets." And it's like, no, I understand that. I'm not asking for you to give me your secret sauce. Just talk about some of the things you do. And then I would start talking about what I do and get them talking about it as well, because we can all learn from each other. It's a pretty big pie out there. So yeah, that's learning from people as well as the books and things. And we'll watch documentaries. We'll do the podcasting as well. We stream from Netflix and Amazon. Amazon's got quite a bit of business documentaries and things in there. And there's some fun ones you can learn about different business models. And there's always there's always a nugget that you can pull and apply to your business. But just continue trainings. For us in the PI world, there are other partners that give trainings to clients. I've been through the certification training 3 times. It doesn't hurt to go through it a 4th time to see how they're doing it, because I always get something out of it. I'm like, oh, that's good. So PI as an organization will oftentimes hold podcasts, and really it's for prospects and customers. I'll sit in on them because I learn something every time.
Great. But I'm not going to let you off the hook, though. You mentioned books, that you mentioned one book in particular, so we'll link to that in the show notes. What are a couple of your other most favorite? You know, what we say in podcast interviewing is what is a book that you would most recommend or gift to someone else?
Oh, wow. So yeah, there is Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. That's awesome. One of my favorite books, and it's not an easy read, but it's by Dr. Joe Dispenza. I'm looking at it on my desk. It's called Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. That's really good. It's all about thinking differently, and it's about meditation. And I think the subtitle is How to Lose Your Mind and Create a New One. So getting out of those habits, the automatic habits that you have, and thinking differently and being positive. That's really helpful. Let's see. There's I like The Go-Giver by Bob Berg. That's a good one. And Flight Plan by Brian Tracy. That's a good, fun, quick read. I actually read it on a plane in the time that it took to go. It's like a 2-hour plane flight. It's nice and short, but it's all about making a plan and then what happens along the way. So, and he breaks it down into everything from a business plan to a plan for Thursday, what you're going to do, and breaking it down. And I've done this with clients over the years. Back when I was a career coach sometimes too, I'd be like, hey, what's the end game? What does retirement look like? And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm out of work. And I'm like, bear with me. What's retirement look like? And then, okay, so how'd you get there? What's the last job you have before you can retire? All right, well, what's the job before that set you up for that? And we go backwards and I say, so what's the job you need today? And if you have a path, that's helpful, because every single step that you could make that's along the way, if it's not on the path, don't do it. Or if it doesn't feel right, go back to your plan, because now you know, oh, the reason that doesn't feel right is it's a step sideways. So I think it's Honda Motor Company. They have a 150-year business plan in place at all times. It's a flexible document. Things change. Energy sources, all sorts of things change. But in that document, they're planning that far out. The larger block of time that you manage, the more successful you're going to be. I think it was Tony Robbins who said that. So, but that's where they discovered that even if they're a market leader in a certain segment, every 4 years, car gets redone. Even if you're the #1 bestseller, it has to be redone. And they do that for a number of reasons. And a lot of people lease for 3 years, and it keeps the residual values and the resale values high. So now people interpret that as, oh, a Honda's a really, really good car, because look at the resale value. It's stronger than most other ones. And that helps their marketing and their brand. So it all is tied together into that 150-year business plan. So, and they're a tiny, tiny car company. They're not big like some of the other ones that you think. And during the recession in 2008, 2009, every single car manufacturer was losing money. They were the only one that turned a profit that year.
Interesting. You know, I want to circle back to Brian Tracy for a minute. First, because he's the one that's attributed the quote that says, if you read one book a week in a particular topic by the end of the year, you would be one of the top income earners and knowledgeable people in that particular area. I'm paraphrasing, but something like that. True?
So and I've met Brian on several occasions.
This is the other reason why I'm bringing it up, because I know that you've done some work with him, and that's a gift I think that you can pass along to our listeners and viewers about, you know, what he might further say about that topic.
Well, there's a couple things there, and I am going to give away a secret, and I hope he doesn't get upset at me for this. There's an app called Blinkist. Have you heard of it? Yeah. So it's basically today's modern version of Cliff Notes. That's how a lot of those books get read, by the way. And it's great too. You know, Tony Robbins had that book Money, and it's 700 pages, and the Blinkist is like 17 pages, so it cuts it down. And sorry, Tony, I know people should read the book, but it's so things like that are helpful. And I'll admit sometimes I'm guilty of looking at a thinner book, going, hey, I'll read that. But some of the headier ones, like Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, I'm looking at it. It's a pretty thick book, but yeah, the more you read, the more you're going to pick up. And I'm always asking top people that I know, hey, what's a good book to read? What's on your nightstand right now? Because, you know, I'll learn stuff about any topic, by the way. So it's not always about business. Sometimes it's about thinking. Sometimes it's a story. It all applies. And I usually learn something. I read comic books, man. So I'm 48 years old and I'll still read comic books. but there's some good themes in there, and that's good. It's a good release too, just to do something completely mindless. But every once in a while, I'll get a nugget out of there.
So other than the Summon Courage Change Everything podcast, what is another one that you would recommend to our listeners?
I'm a huge fan of Tim Ferriss. Mm-hmm. It's a great podcast. It's usually funny, but there's always something to learn there. And Dr. Joe Dispenza has a podcast as well. He calls it a teleclass. It's usually interactive. His stuff is really good. And I'm trying to think who else I've learned a lot from recently. Chris Voss does a podcast as well, and it's less frequent, and he oftentimes goes on other people's podcasts, but I will follow him. I follow him on Twitter as well. And I got to have lunch with him today at the seminar that we went to get, so that was really fun.
Interesting, great. And I'll add my couple. I like Hidden Brain, which is an NPR podcast, Hidden Brain.
Who does that?
It's Shankar.
Okay, cool.
I can't pronounce his last name, but we'll put it in the show notes. And the other one is How I Built This with Guy Raz, R-A-Z.
Cool.
You would love these, and our listeners would as well for a variety of reasons.
Very cool. Mm-hmm. Very cool. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Great. So as we wind down, I wanted to ask you a couple more questions, a little bit more rapid fire. Okay. The first one is, and I'll give credit to Ferriss because he uses this one amongst others, but it's that one about if you could put a saying, a quote on a billboard that would impact the most amount of people, what would it be?
The one that's had a big impact for me is the one I'd probably share. It's what you think about comes about. So, think big, think positive.
Great. Now, you talked already about your dad a few times. What was the biggest piece of advice that your dad ever gave you?
It really was around working hard. He kind of told me that if you get behind, if you feel like you're not achieving something, or if you feel like you're lost, he said, work harder. Just keep working hard. You'll always find a way.
That's fantastic advice. It's so true. We can outwit, outsmart our competition.
Yeah, and sometimes in the work itself, that's when you discover the magic bullet. It's just you haven't uncovered it yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember, just flashed in my mind, it was Bill Bradley, a famous basketball player turned politician, that said something to the effect that somebody out there is practicing, and they will beat you if you aren't practicing as hard or harder. And I kind of butchered it, but that was the main message.
Yeah.
Mm. How about this then, Dave? What advice would you give to your 21-year-old self?
Be yourself. Sometimes as a younger guy, especially back then, I worked really hard to be what I thought I needed to be in a given situation. Mm-hmm. I have to be all buttoned up and professional here. And, I've got to be real loose and everything else. And as a musician, sometimes, you had to be a certain way. And I would just be yourself. Be authentic, be yourself. If people don't like you for who you are, don't hang out with them. Who cares?
Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah, that's very thoughtful, because so many of us, we try to live the life that everyone expects us to live.
Yes.
And that's not being authentic to yourself.
And I will also say that people are allowed to change. And so this time of year, around the holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, all the other stuff, whatever role you've been cast in your family tree, sometimes when you get together with family, they put you in that role. Mm-hmm. I'm the baby, I'm the youngest, so I'm always cast that way. Mm-hmm. So people don't really allow for you to change a lot of times. So that's a big deal. And if you're yourself, and if you like yourself, you'll be confident in yourself in different situations, and it won't matter. And those that don't dig you, they're not part of your journey. Keep walking.
So Dave, a couple of things as we finish here related to Predictive Index. If our listeners would like to learn more about that tool, how's the best way that they could go about doing that?
The best way would be to go to our website. We have a lot of information there, and also ways to get in touch with us, our phone number, our emails, all that stuff, as well as some very short videos for people to watch if they learn that way. We have downloads too. They can even take it if they want for free on the website there. And our website address is www.nastpartners.com.
Mm-hmm. Great, and we'll link that for sure. What about other ways to get a hold of you? Is LinkedIn good? Twitter? What do you recommend?
Yeah, LinkedIn is great. I'm very responsive. I'm on there quite a bit. So yeah, shoot me a note on LinkedIn. Shoot me a connection request. LinkedIn's great as well. Thank you.
Excellent, Dave. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Matt. This was great.